"It's okay. They won't come close if you're not ready." And the dog, as if familiar with that always gentle voice, would lie down, still watching the stranger, but no longer panicked and running away like before. It was a small step forward, but for Milo it was a long journey. The weekend sky was unusually clear, with sunlight gently spilling over the rice fields, which were in full bloom. Derek closed the trunk of the car, glancing over at Caleb, who had a small backpack slung over his shoulder, one hand tightly holding the gray leash attached to Milo. The dog stood close to Caleb, his tail slightly tucked, eyes darting nervously across the vast farmyard where their extended family had gathered. The distant chatter of adults, the laughter of children echoing from the chicken coop, the creaking of a swing from behind the garden, all of it painted a lively scene, yet one Milo had never truly stepped into. Derek's hesitation remained. Before getting into the car, he had paused for a long while. Even though Caleb had reassured him that Milo had made significant progress, a nameless worry still lingered in Derek's heart, that the dog might panic in an unfamiliar place, or worse, hurt someone if cornered. But then Caleb's pleading look and soft voice, "I think this is a chance for him to see a different world," made Derek agree, but on one condition: the leash must never leave Caleb's hand. As the car stopped at the farm gate, Milo stepped out with Caleb, his back leg still hesitant to touch the ground. The air here smelled of fresh grass, dry hay, and soft soil, unfamiliar but not frightening. The dog sniffed the air deeply, then recoiled when the sound of children screaming from the cow pen reached his ears. Caleb tightened his grip on the leash and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." Despite Caleb's reassurance, Milo stayed close to him, each step cautious, his ears upright and his tail pressed against his belly. The adults watching the scene smiled sympathetically. A few approached Derek, asking about the handsome dog that looked so shy. Derek simply smiled and replied, "He's learning to trust again." And then, to let things unfold naturally, he stepped back, allowing Caleb to guide Milo into the atmosphere. In the backyard, Caleb's cousins were playing. Some were a little older, others around Caleb's age. Milo began to relax when he noticed that Caleb wasn't leaving his side. Caleb sat down on the grass, took off his shoes, and invited the dog to lie next to him. And for the first time, beneath the golden sun and the laughter of other children, Milo lay down, his head resting on Caleb's leg, eyes wide open but no longer avoiding everything around him. Things might have continued like this, peaceful and gentle, if not for the sound of footsteps rushing up behind them. One of Caleb's younger cousins, playing around, ran past unexpectedly and, not seeing Milo's tail, stepped heavily on it. The dog's yelp wasn't a bark, but a panicked, strangled cry. In an instant, Milo jerked violently, turning sharply, his eyes wide with fear as his body reacted instinctively. The little cousin burst into laughter. "What a scaredy cat dog!" But Milo didn't stick around to hear. The leash jerked taut, slipping from Caleb's hand as the dog suddenly recoiled, just a split second, and then Milo bolted. "Milo!" Caleb shouted, panic flooding his voice, jumping to his feet, eyes fixed on the dog's fleeing silhouette as it dashed through the wooden fence into the field beyond. "Stop!" Derek called out, but it was too late. Caleb didn't think twice. He ran purely on instinct, barefoot against the grass, his eyes locked on the small gray figure growing smaller as it headed for the trail leading to the waterway behind the farm. The sun grew hotter. Beneath Caleb's feet were stones, mud, and dry straw that pricked at his ankles. But he didn't stop. The wind howled in his ears, and his mouth was dry, leaving him only enough breath to shout a single name. "Milo! Milo, don't run anymore!" The dirt path gradually descended. The sound of flowing water echoed in the distance. Milo had stopped. No, not because he heard the call. He stopped because ahead of him was a shallow canal, its crystal-clear water full and quietly flowing over the stone banks. Caleb stopped too, panting heavily. He could see Milo's shoulders trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the old fear that was creeping back. The breeze from the water carried the soft sound of bubbles breaking. Milo didn't step forward, but he didn't run either. He just stood there, his body tense, head bowed low. Caleb approached slowly, without making a sound. When he was only a few steps away, he stopped. His breath still heavy, but his voice came out remarkably calm. "It's okay. No one's chasing you. No one's punishing you. It was just an accident. They didn't mean to." Milo didn't turn around, but his ears twitched slightly. "I know. The water scares you. The laughter scares you too. But Milo, don't leave me alone. If you're going to run, let me run with you." A gust of wind passed by, ruffling Caleb's sweaty hair. He lowered his head and slowly extended his hand forward, not to touch, but to simply offer it. Milo gently turned his head. His wild, lost eyes met Caleb's after a long silence. And for the first time, Caleb didn't feel panic. There was no more desperation, no fear like that rainy day before, only confusion. A Milo caught between instinct and the fragile trust that was beginning to bloom. And then, Milo took a small step, not backward, not turning away, but toward Caleb. Caleb smiled, his hand still outstretched, but his heart was ringing like the bells of a church, a small whisper in his chest. This time, he's come back. Milo's left foot pressed into the dry earth, blood slowly seeping from a deep gash that ran along his thick fur, stretching down his ankle. Caleb didn't notice at first, but when Milo hesitated in his stride on the way back, his steps faltering as if hiding the pain, Caleb's heart sank. "Milo, you're hurt," he said, his voice trembling. His eyes fixed on the blood stain as if unable to believe what he was seeing, while he'd been too focused on comforting the dog. Derek had caught up with them, and upon seeing the scene, he froze. Without a word, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, knelt down, and gently pressed it to Milo's injured leg. The warm blood spread across the fabric. He looked at Caleb for a moment, then clenched his fist. "We need to get him to the vet right away." For the first time, Derek wasn't just an observer. He carefully slid his arms beneath Milo's body, softly saying, "It's okay. I'll carry you." Milo paused, but didn't struggle. He only sighed heavily, pressing his head against Derek's shoulder, as though trying to hide his pain. Derek's gray shirt darkened in a patch, but he didn't mind. His strong hands, which had always been steady, now trembled, not from the weight of the dog, but from an unexpected sorrow he never imagined he would feel. In the car, Caleb sat close to Milo, gently cradling the dog's head. Every time the car jolted, Milo let out a soft groan, and Caleb would lean down, whispering, "I know you're hurting, but the doctor will help you." The veterinary clinic was quiet, save for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Derek walked in, his voice low but firm. "He's injured. Needs stitches." The receptionist, upon seeing the blood, immediately nodded and called for the doctor. While they waited, Caleb sat on the floor of the waiting room, leaning against the wall, Milo resting his head on the boy's lap. Caleb didn't say anything more, just gently stroked the dog's back in rhythm with his breath. Calm, soothing. His eyes were red, but no tears fell. It was as if he knew that if he cried, Milo might see it as a sign of weakness, and he didn't want his brave friend, his loyal companion, to think that he was giving up. When Derek returned from the front desk, he stood still for a long while, watching them. How many times had he doubted? How many times had he thought his son was just a dreamy boy with naive emotions? But in that moment, as he watched Caleb sitting in silence, gently stroking Milo's back with unconditional love, Derek knew. There were lessons about humanity that he had yet to learn, but his 8-year-old son had already understood them long ago. Just then, the door opened. Another boy entered, his face downcast, his eyes fixed on the floor. It was the same cousin who had teased Milo earlier. He hesitantly approached, holding a piece of bandage that the doctor had left behind. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with guilt. I didn't know he was that scared. I didn't mean to hurt him." Caleb looked up at him. No anger in his eyes. He just silently placed his hand on Milo's back, as if asking, "Will you forgive him?" Milo didn't move his head from Caleb's lap, but unexpectedly he lifted it, his deep brown eyes meeting the cousin's. At first he took a step back, his ears twitching slightly as his instinct to protect himself surfaced. But then, no one pressured him, no one gestured. He stopped. His gaze remained fixed on the boy, not in a threatening way, but with quiet contemplation. After a few seconds that seemed to stretch forever, Milo lowered his head slightly. He didn't move closer, didn't nuzzle the boy's hand, but that small bow of his head, a clear nod, was forgiveness. The cousin blinked rapidly. "Thank you," his voice so soft it nearly blended with the hum of the air conditioner. Then he turned and left, not running, but moving quieter than when he'd come in. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to face the consequences of a careless joke, and what it meant to receive the forgiveness of a creature that had suffered so much. An hour later, when Milo was brought out of the treatment room, his leg carefully bandaged, the vet smiled. "He's been very good. A little scared of the needle, but didn't bite, didn't resist. Very special." Derek picked the dog up again, this time his hands no longer shaking. He looked at Caleb, then at Milo, and in that rare moment, he said without hiding anything, "We're taking him home." On the way back, the sun was beginning to set. Caleb had fallen asleep on the back seat, his head leaning against Milo. The dog wasn't asleep, but his gaze had softened, silently watching the sunset stretch across the road. It was no longer the road to escape, but the road home. And this time, Milo knew, up ahead was no longer an unfamiliar place, but home. Home where a boy had spent hours just listening to a dog that couldn't speak. Home where no matter how much pain there was always someone sitting beside you, whispering, "It's okay, you're not alone." After the night Milo returned from the clinic, Caleb's house felt quieter than usual. It wasn't the silence of worry, but the gentle stillness of a new beginning. Milo rested on a soft mat by the living room window, his injured leg still wrapped in white bandages, but his eyes no longer seemed dull. Every morning, Caleb would change the bandages, gently cleaning the wound with trembling hands, whispering tiny words as if only he and Milo understood them. Phrases like, "You did great," or "Get well soon, so we can go for walks again." There were no grand gestures, just sincere, steady care without giving up. Derek, though not showing much, watched quietly from afar. At first, he only observed, occasionally nodding when Milo finished his food or looked up when Caleb called. But then one morning, before the sun had grown too hot, Derek placed his coffee cup down, turned to Caleb, and spoke softly like the breeze. "How about a walk this morning?" Caleb looked up, his face lighting up with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. "Really, Dad? Are you going to walk Milo with me?" Derek didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for the leash that hung near the door. When he bent down to attach it to Milo's collar, the dog flinched slightly, old instincts still lingering, but didn't pull away. Milo only looked up at him, and in that glance, Derek realized he no longer saw resistance or fear, but only curiosity, as if Milo was asking, "This time, do you truly mean it?" They walked slowly through the small park near their house. Caleb skipped ahead, holding a stick, occasionally turning back to call Milo's name. The dog walked slowly beside Derek, neither too close nor falling behind. His tail wagged gently, not forcefully, but it was the most lively sign Derek had seen from him since he'd come to live with them. An elderly couple passed by and stopped to admire. "What a beautiful dog," the woman said. Derek smiled, genuinely, no longer just out of politeness. Yes, beautiful, and brave too. In the days that followed, their morning walks became a shared routine. Milo started walking faster, sometimes stopping to sniff flowers along the path or turning his ears to listen to the birds singing in the trees. One day, When a strong wind blew and a trash can toppled over by the side of the road, Caleb spun around in a panic. But Milo didn't run. He froze for just a second, then continued walking, casting a glance at Caleb as if to reassure him. It's okay. Derek began to feel something soften within him. A part of him he hadn't realized had been frozen for so long. Perhaps it had been since his wife passed, or maybe it was from seeing Caleb's sensitivity toward animals and life, and how Derek himself had never quite known how to show love to his son beyond the practical. But now, in the light of the soft mornings and the leash connecting their hands, Derek saw clearly that the distance between him and Caleb had shrunk, little by little, thanks to a dog. The same dog Derek had once wanted to leave at the pet store. One afternoon, as Derek was watering the plants outside, Caleb called out from the house, "Dad, Milo wants to see you." He stepped inside, feeling a bit weary from the day, and found Milo sitting by the door, his front paws neatly crossed, tail wagging softly. Caleb sat behind him, not speaking, just looking at Derek and nodding slightly. Derek bent down, reaching out his hand to gently pat the dog's head as he always did. But this time, Milo tilted his head and stepped a little closer. He touched his nose to Derek's hand, a light touch, like dew, and then unexpectedly licked a short line across the palm. It wasn't hard, wasn't wet, just a shy greeting. Derek froze. For a moment he wasn't sure if he had really felt it. But then, he laughed. A small, quiet laugh, but something in his voice made the whole room feel brighter. Caleb cheered from behind. "He likes you now." Derek looked at his hand, still warm from the soft touch of Milo's tongue, and then at the dog. "Yeah," he said, bending down to stroke Milo's back. "And maybe I like him too." That night, for the first time, Derek took a bowl of water over to Milo, and for the first time, Milo didn't turn away. He just glanced at Derek, then lowered his head to drink. Outside, nothing special happened. It wasn't raining, nor was the sun blindingly bright. It was just a regular evening in a very quiet house. But for the three of them, one adult, one child, and one four-legged member, it was a strange milestone. A small moment, but one that marked something much bigger. No longer did any of them have to strain to maintain distance. And in the middle of that house, for the first time, not only Caleb but Derek too felt that they truly had another member. Since the day Milo was injured at the farm, Caleb could no longer hide the caution in his eyes every time the dog ran too enthusiastically. His gaze would linger on the neatly bandaged wound on Milo's left leg, as if afraid that just by looking away for a moment, it might tear open again. But fortunately, this time, there were no complications. The cut healed quickly, and Milo was able to walk, though still needing to avoid strenuous activity. To ease the dog's anxiety, Derek proactively called the vet to visit their home for regular checkups. Milo had once been extremely sensitive to strangers entering his space, but this time he didn't run away. When the vet approached, Milo kept his distance, his watchful eyes following every movement, but there was no trembling or growling like before. Caleb sat beside him, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. Perhaps it was Caleb's presence that made everything easier. "He's doing well," the vet concluded after a thorough checkup. But perhaps the issue isn't just physical. He glanced at Caleb and then turned to Derek. "I know of a rehabilitation center for dogs that have been abused. They don't force them. They just help the animals learn to live normally again." Derek stayed silent for a moment, then looked at Caleb. The boy didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. The following week, the three of them, a big one, a small one, and a four-legged one, drove 20 minutes outside of town to the training center. It wasn't like the rigid training grounds Derek had imagined. Instead, it was an open space with white fences, soft grass, natural wood stations, and distant barks scattered about like shy greetings. The lead trainer, Jenna, was a woman in her 30s with a slender build and a gentle smile, but her eyes missed nothing. She observed Milo from afar during their first meeting, making no move to approach or signal anything. "We're not in a hurry," she said. "Here, the animals choose when to trust, in their own time." Milo didn't move forward, even inching closer to Caleb whenever there was any motion from the stranger. The leash pulled taut like a bridge between doubt and safety. Derek frowned, ready to say something, but Caleb shook his head, whispering, "Let me." Caleb knelt down, placing his hand on Milo's back. "We don't have to do anything, remember?" he whispered softly. "We just stand here together." And as if understanding, Milo relaxed slightly. His ears drooped, but his body no longer tensed. Caleb looked at the trainer. "I think we can try." They started with simple exercises, stepping over low wooden poles, walking around circles drawn with white chalk. At first, Milo didn't follow the commands. He just stared at Caleb, stamping his feet, refusing to move. But each time, Caleb didn't shout or pull. He simply smiled, scratched behind the dog's ears, and said, "We can go slower." On the third day, Milo stepped through the first ring without the leash being pulled. On the fifth day, he lowered his head to sniff a training pole wrapped in foam without retreating. By the end of the first week, he sat down when Caleb held out his hand with a simple command. It was a small step, but for a dog who once trembled under a table, it was a miracle. After the session, Jenna sat down next to Derek, while he waited for Caleb to bring water for Milo. "This dog hasn't lost the ability to trust," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He's just waiting for the right person." Derek didn't respond immediately. He gazed out at the yard, where Caleb was pouring water from the tap into a plastic bowl. Milo stood next to him, tongue out, tail wagging gently like a reed in the wind. It was an ordinary scene, yet it made Derek's heart tighten. "And my son," he said slowly, "seems to be that person." That evening, when they returned home, Caleb sprawled out on the living room floor, exhausted from a day full of sunshine and laughter. Milo lay beside him, his head resting on the boy's hand, as though he never wanted to be apart for another moment. Derek watched from the kitchen doorway, silent. But in his heart, a decision was forming. Tomorrow he would take a day off, not because he was tired, but to accompany his son as they brought this special dog to the training center once again. It was no longer just to evaluate. This time it was to walk alongside him. For the first time in his life, he realized, some lessons can only be truly understood when you walk together through the darkness. And it is then that you truly know what light is. After mastering the basic training, Milo began entering the most difficult phase, the challenges that touched the deepest fears within him. And the first challenge was water. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. For a dog who carried the memory of being submerged, of being chained by the cold stone pool until he turned blue, even a small patch of water could freeze his legs in place. So that morning, when Caleb led Milo toward the artificial pond in the training yard, all eyes around them followed, not out of curiosity, but in quiet hope. Because everyone understood, this wasn't just a test of skills. This was the first threshold for Milo to truly escape the shadow of his past. The training area was divided into sections, and the pond was situated in the southern corner, where the still water quietly reflected the slanting sunlight. It was a shallow pond, completely safe, with sloping steps so the dogs could walk in and out on their own. For ordinary animals, it was just a game, a place to cool off after overcoming obstacles. But for Milo, this was a challenge that carried the weight of an old nightmare. Caleb led Milo closer to the pond, the leash loose, neither tight nor forced. He stopped a few steps away from the water's edge, knelt down, and placed a small treat on the first step. "You don't need to do anything, Milo," Caleb whispered softly. "Just look at it, that's all." Milo stood still. The breeze brushed against his back, carrying the unfamiliar scent of water, the kind of smell that made him freeze instantly. His eyes widened. A cascade of broken memories surged in his mind. The roar of water crashing against the sides of a basin, the angry shouts, the man's hands gripping his neck, pushing him down. Milo remembered every moment, the choking on water, the desperation, the sharp cold that burned through his lungs. Those days hadn't passed. They had just slept in the dark corners, and now they were waking up, piece by piece. He stepped back, his hind legs trembling. Derek moved to approach, but Caleb shook his head. "It's okay," he whispered. "I think he's just fighting with himself a little." Milo didn't run away, but he stayed still. His eyes shifted between the still water and the small treat, then to Caleb's face. There was no force, no scrutinizing gaze. Just the boy, who had patiently sat for hours outside the cage where Milo had once turned his face to the wall. The first person who hadn't touched him until he touched first. The only one who had stepped into the shadow of his fear without turning on a flashlight, without forcing him to change immediately. Milo took a small step forward. The treat remained where it was, the sunlight glistening on the clear water. He lowered his head, sniffing. The scent of water, grass, and memories all mixed together. And then, one paw stepped down. The cold water. A sharp sensation shot up his leg, causing Milo's heart to pound. But still, no one shouted, no one pulled him in, no one forced his head down. After mastering the basic training exercises, Milo entered the most challenging phase, one that touched on the deepest fears within him. The first trial was water. No one needed to speak it aloud, but everyone knew. For a dog with memories of being drowned, bound by a cold stone basin until his body turned blue, even the smallest patch of water could make his legs freeze. So that morning, when Caleb led Milo towards the artificial pond in the training yard, every eye around them was watching. Not out of curiosity, but with quiet hope, because they all understood. This wasn't just a skill test. This was the first step for Milo to truly escape the shadows of his past. The training area was divided into several sections, and the artificial pond was at the southern corner, where the still water reflected the slanted sunlight. It was a shallow pond, perfectly safe, with sloping steps that allowed the dog to walk in and out on his own. For most animals, it was a fun game, a place to cool off after overcoming obstacles. But for Milo, it was a challenge that bore the shape of an old nightmare. Caleb led Milo closer to the water, the leash loose, not tight, not forcing. He stopped a few steps from the edge, knelt down, and placed a small treat on the first step. "You don't have to do anything, okay?" Caleb whispered softly. "Just look at it. That's enough." Milo stood still. The breeze brushed against his back, carrying with it the unfamiliar scent of water, a scent that made him halt instantly. His eyes widened. In his mind, a cascade of fragmented memories surfaced. The sound of water crashing into the sides of the basin, angry shouts, a man's hand grabbing his neck, forcing him down. Milo remembered every detail. The choking water, the despair, the cold pain seeping into his lungs. Those days hadn't passed. They had only lain dormant in the darkest corners of his mind, and now they were waking up, piece by piece. He took a step back, his hind legs trembling. Derek started to move forward, but Caleb shook his head. "It's okay," he whispered. "I think he's just fighting it a little." Milo didn't run, but he stood still. His gaze wavered between the still water and the small treat, then shifted to Caleb's face. There was no pressure, no searching eyes, just the boy, who was the only one who had ever sat patiently for hours outside the cage where Milo had turned his back to the world. The first one who never touched him until he was ready to reach out first. The only one who had ventured into the darkness of his fear without turning on a flashlight or forcing him to change immediately. Milo took a small step forward. The treat still lay there, the sunlight reflecting on the clear water. He lowered his head to sniff. The smell of water, of grass, of memories, all mixed together. And then, one foot stepped down. Cold water. A sharp sensation ran up his leg, making his heart pound in his chest. But no one shouted, no one pulled him in, no one forced his head down. The second foot. The water now reached Milo's lower belly. He stood still. This time he didn't tremble as before, but remained cautious. In his heart, there was a tug of war between the instinct to retreat and something new, a fragile trust trying to sprout. Caleb sat still, unmoving, not laughing loudly, not clapping like others were preparing to do. He just watched, and Milo watched him back. A deep breath. Then Milo placed all 4 paws into the water. He didn't swim, didn't jump, didn't play. He just stood there, his eyes never leaving the boy. Beneath his feet, the water gently lapped against the steps, as if offering comfort. The entire training field fell silent for a few seconds. Then, applause erupted. A single clap at first, then 2, and soon the whole yard was filled with the warm sound of celebration. But Caleb didn't look toward the crowd. He lowered his head toward Milo and whispered, just softly enough for the wind to carry it away, but a message his heart would remember forever. "You've conquered yourself." Milo stepped out of the pond. Water dripped from his paws with each step, but it wasn't the terrifying wetness of the past. It was the feeling of a creature that had just broken free from what once held its heart captive. Trainer Jenna approached, calmly, without rushing or showing off. She knelt down to Milo's level, extended her hand, and stopped halfway, waiting. Milo looked at her hand for a moment, then turned to Caleb. Once again, the eyes of these 2 small beings met, and this time, Milo lowered his head, gently licking the tips of Jenna's fingers. She smiled, said nothing. Because sometimes the greatest lessons aren't spoken in words. They come from quiet courage, stepping through fear, and trusting again. Caleb turned to Derek, his eyes shining but his face breaking into a bright smile. "I think Milo has really started over now." And Derek, the man who once didn't believe that a wounded heart could heal, nodded. He said nothing, just placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Inside him, for the first time, there was no longer worry or hesitation. Instead, there was trust, that the kind of love patient enough, quiet enough, always knows the way back. After the water training session, Milo was looked at differently by everyone at the center. He was no longer just the fearful dog. He had become a symbol that courage could grow from the most fragile places. But everyone knew the journey was far from over, and the next day, another challenge awaited. The task seemed simple enough. A line of people stood in 2 rows, forming a path about 10 meters long. They were instructed to clap softly. No cheering, no shouting. The goal was to help the dogs get used to sudden noises from a crowd, a skill that therapy dogs needed in public spaces. For most dogs, this was a brief exercise. But when Caleb heard about the challenge, he looked at Milo and instantly knew this was going to be a long road. Milo had always reacted violently to clapping. That sound was forever tied to pain and cruelty in his past. After every strike, his previous owner would clap, laughing as if tormenting a small animal was a form of entertainment. Now every clap felt like a blade slicing through his memories, and Milo instinctively shrank back. Caleb gripped the leash tightly, his palms sweaty. As they approached the first row of people, Milo froze. His eyes widened, his tail tucked tightly against his body, and his whole being recoiled like a stretched rubber band. A single clap rang out, just a soft sound, but enough to make Milo's ears press flat against his head, his breath ragged, and his body trembling. In his mind, an old scene resurfaced as if it had never left. A filthy concrete yard, a tight leash pulling at his neck, a heavy hand crashing down, followed by clapping and cruel laughter. Back then, he was just a small creature, not understanding why he was punished. All he knew was the more he shrank away, the harder it got. And now, in the warm sunlight of the training center, those memories flooded back, pulling Milo into a deep, suffocating shadow. The people in the rows slowly realized what was happening. They exchanged glances and then fell silent. No one clapped again. Some sighed. Others put a hand over their hearts as if they too could feel the weight of what Milo was experiencing. Caleb couldn't bear it. He released the leash, knelt down, and wrapped his arms around the trembling dog. "No one will hurt you again," he whispered, his voice trembling as tears welled up. "They're not angry at you. They're cheering for you, just like I do every day." Milo buried his head in Caleb's arms, as though the boy was his final shield against the world. His heart raced, but with each beat, something inside him began to melt, like the thin, stubborn ice that had never allowed itself to crack. Derek stood at the edge, his fists clenched. He didn't intervene, but every tremble from Milo, every word Caleb spoke, pierced deep into his heart. In the distance, trainer Jenna stood silently. Her eyes were moist, but she simply placed her hand on the shoulder of the person next to her and whispered, "He's fighting. Not against the test, but against his past." Caleb said nothing more. He just sat there, silent. After a moment he sighed, wiped his tears, and stood up. But he didn't pull Milo along. He took a few steps toward the end of the line, then turned back, raising his hand in a soft wave. "You don't have to do anything." Caleb's voice was light as a breeze. "But if you want to step through, I'll be waiting on the other side." Milo lifted his head. The crowd stood still. No one clapped anymore. Only the wind blew gently, carrying something nameless, but as soft as an invitation. And then, with his legs still trembling, Milo took one step, then stopped. He glanced to both sides, where the hands had once clapped. No sound. No anger. He took another step. His tail remained tucked, but his eyes were now fixed straight ahead. His body still tense, but his feet didn't retreat. Each step was a battle, but Milo didn't stop. When he reached the middle of the row, a soft clap echoed. Not to intimidate, but like a word of encouragement. It came from an elderly woman, her hair silver and her eyes moist. "Good job," she whispered. Milo paused, his ears perked. One more step. 2 more. Then he passed out of the row of people. Caleb was waiting at the end. He didn't hug him, didn't cry, just clapped 3 times, softly. And right then, for the first time since being adopted, Milo wagged his tail. Not out of excitement, not by reflex, but as a response. He understood. Not every clap was an attack. Not every memory was a chain. Another clap rang out. Then 2, then 3. This time Milo didn't run. He simply stood by Caleb, his head resting on the boy's leg and his dark brown eyes gently closed, not hiding, but resting. For the first time, after so many years, he had walked through his own fear. And on the other side of that fear was an 8-year-old boy smiling in the sunlight. After the clapping training session, Milo seemed to emerge from a long dream. He no longer huddled into the familiar shadows, no longer flinched when someone reached out to touch him gently. The strangest thing was, new experiences no longer made him shy. Instead, there was an unspoken excitement, as if a door had just opened, and he didn't want to stand outside anymore. Caleb noticed this change most clearly. In the following training sessions, Milo began to approach the trainers on his own, no longer waiting for Caleb to lead. When given obstacle courses, high bars, dark tunnels, narrow stairs, he crossed them with initial caution, followed by an unexpected determination. The more they trained, the more Milo showed an uncanny ability to focus and remember. With just one demonstration, he could recall the path, handle each situation. One day, trainer Jenna placed a small wooden box on the training ground, inside which was an object with a distinct scent. She explained that this was a scent recognition test, combined with visual signals. Milo was asked to identify the correct box from 3 options. In less than 15 seconds, he walked straight to the right box, sat down, and looked at Caleb as if to ask, "Done, what's next?" Jenna was momentarily silent before laughing, unable to hide her amazement. "This dog is a talent," she said. "I've worked with many intelligent breeds, but Milo's ability to handle situations is extremely rare." Caleb smiled, patting his friend's head, feeling both proud and a little anxious. The more Milo advanced, the more Caleb feared. Feared that one day, this dog might no longer belong solely to him. A week later, after watching Milo excel in a reflexive obedience drill combined with scent training, Jenna approached Derek as they stood outside, watching Caleb play with Milo. I think Milo isn't just suited to be a therapy dog. He has the right reactions, a high level of focus, and an incredible calmness. I'd like to recommend him for a specialized guide dog training program." Derek furrowed his brow. "A guide dog? You mean the kind that helps the visually impaired?" "Exactly. It's the highest level of assistance training," Jenna nodded. "And Milo has the qualities, not in strength or reflexes, but in his steadiness. He's much calmer than most dogs his age, and he's very attuned to human emotions." Derek didn't respond immediately. He watched the field where Caleb was training Milo to back up on command. The boy laughed every time Milo raised a paw in the wrong direction, sitting down as if saying, "Hold on, let me think again." It was a sweet, peaceful sight, as if there was a language between them that no one else could intrude upon. "Caleb won't agree easily," Derek said after a moment, his voice turning serious. "He's more attached to Milo than I thought." And that was true. When Derek relayed the offer to his son, Caleb immediately fell silent. He sat on the porch, Milo resting his head on his lap, his eyes seemingly asking. Caleb lowered his head, gently stroking the soft ear of the dog, whispering, "If they want to take him, what should I do?" Derek sat down beside him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he told Caleb the story of the first time he brought him home from the hospital, when he was just 3 days old. He told him how scared he had been, how he thought he wouldn't be able to do it right. But then, day by day, as Caleb held his hand and babbled, "Daddy," he realized the important thing wasn't holding on to his son, but making him strong enough to walk on his own. "I think," Derek said softly, "if Milo really has overcome what you've seen, and if he can help someone the way you've helped him, maybe, we should give him the chance." Caleb was silent for a long time. That night, he didn't say anything to Milo, just held him as they slept. But the next morning, when the family went to the center, Caleb was the one to walk into Jenna's office and say, "If the program is good for him, I want to try." Jenna smiled, placing her hand on the boy's shoulder. "This dog is a warrior, and he already has the best companion." The following week, Milo began his introductory sessions to the new environment. There, he met more strangers, had to perform more complex tasks like stopping when there was an obstacle ahead, recognizing hand signals from behind, and especially leading in noisy spaces. At first, Milo was still a little cautious, but with Caleb by his side in the early sessions, he quickly adapted. The most remarkable day came during a field exercise, when Milo was taken to a busy shopping center, a place filled with crowds, noise, and bright, reflective lights. Surprisingly, he didn't show any fear. On the contrary, each of Milo's steps was confident, his ears perked to catch every sound, his head slightly raised, and his eyes no longer avoiding anything. He was no longer the dog that once trembled in the shadows. Now, he was a quiet, dependable guide. Each evening, Caleb still played with Milo, going over their training exercises, gently reminding him, "If one day you're ever far away, remember, I'm your home. Always have been." Milo rested his head on Caleb's leg, wagging his tail just slightly, like a promise. Under the early summer sun, the silver car from the training center came to a stop along the familiar roadside, the small path that led to the wooden house where Caleb and Derek had lived quietly, just as they had in the early days. As the car door opened, Milo jumped out, his 4 paws hitting the ground and instantly wagging his tail. His nose lifted as he took a deep breath of the damp grass and wildflowers carried by the breeze. Without anyone calling, without anyone guiding him, he turned back to look at trainer Jenna, his eyes bright and calm. Then, as if in a soft greeting, Milo walked steadily toward the wooden house, a place he knew his heart had never truly left. Caleb had been standing there for a while, his shirt still wrinkled and his hair messy from waking up in a hurry, but his eyes sparkled, as if the sun itself had risen from his small chest. Milo didn't rush forward, didn't leap in excitement like other dogs would. He just walked steadily, step by step, until he stopped in front of the boy. Caleb sat down, his arms open, and Milo, without needing a command, without any invitation, lowered his head and rested it on Caleb's shoulder, letting out a soft sigh as if, At last, he had come home. Jenna approached, her eyes wet with emotion. "Milo has completed all the tests," she told Derek, who stood silently on the porch, still unable to fully comprehend the moment unfolding before him. "He's one of the best recovery cases I've ever seen. But today, when given a choice, he only went in one direction. He came home." Derek didn't respond. He simply walked down, knelt beside his son and his dog. When he reached out, Milo didn't hesitate like before, no longer needing to get comfortable. He placed his paw on Derek's knee, gently nudging it as if to say, "I'm here now." Derek lightly grasped the dog's leg, letting out a soft laugh through his nose, the laugh of someone who had feared so much for so long, and now could only feel deep emotion. From that day on, everything at home changed in a strange way. Milo was no longer the dog that hid under the table or avoided strangers. When someone knocked on the door, he would run to Caleb, standing behind him like a friend, no longer a creature on guard. When Esther, the kind neighbor, brought over some baked goods, Milo would approach, sniff her fingers, then lay down, resting his head on her lap as if to say, "I remember the smell of this bread." Mornings became different. There were no longer alarm clocks or calls from his father to wake him up. Now, each day began with Milo's heavy head resting on Caleb's chest, his tail wagging softly with each breath, and Caleb's laughter filling the air when the dog gently licked his cheek. Caleb had grown a little, but the look he gave Milo was still the same as it had been on the first day. Gentle eyes of someone who had waited months just for a dog to touch his hand. And the most miraculous thing, Milo no longer feared water. One time, Derek took the whole family to the beach for a holiday. Caleb was initially a bit hesitant, but as the car approached, Milo leaned out the window, his ears perked and his eyes bright, as if recognizing a familiar place. The soft sand underfoot, the gentle waves lapping like whispers. Caleb unclipped the leash and softly said, "It's up to you." Milo glanced at him, and then suddenly bolted towards the sea, plunging into the small waves like a child who had just learned to swim. He wasn't afraid. No more hesitation. No more trembling. Instead, there were leaps that splashed foam, spinning circles chasing the waves, and the wind in his fur. Derek sat by the bench, squinting at his son's smile, the sound of Milo barking joyfully amid the crashing waves, and realized this dog had truly become an irreplaceable part of their family. That afternoon, as the sun began to cast long shadows on the sand, Caleb and Milo lay next to each other, their backs touching, eyes gazing up at the amber-colored sky. No one spoke, only the wind, the waves, and the peaceful warmth spreading through their fingers. Caleb gently closed his eyes, whispering, "You don't have to do anything anymore, Milo. Just stay here, with me." And somehow, Milo seemed to understand everything. He nestled his head into Caleb's elbow, sighed deeply like the sea breeze, then closed his eyes. Milo's long journey, from a creature beaten, fearful, and locked out in the rain, to a dog who knew love, knew forgiveness, and knew how to return, had reached the place he had always been searching for, a home. Not because it shielded him from rain or sun, but because it held a boy who had never given up on him. Milo had traveled a long way, only to understand that there are things irreplaceable, like that first gaze, like trust rekindled, and like a small friend who had sat beside a cage for hours just to say, "You don't have to do anything. Just let me be here, by your side." That morning, the training center grounds were livelier than usual. The grass had just been trimmed, picnic tables lined the trees, and colorful flags fluttered in the wind. It was a special day, a picnic for families and their therapy dogs who had completed the training program. The laughter of people blended with the rhythmic barking, creating a harmony of hope and recovery. Caleb sat in the shade, gently stroking Milo's back. The dog was lying with his head resting on Caleb's lap, his eyes half closed as he enjoyed the gentle breeze. Since completing the guide dog training program, Milo had become the center of attention whenever he appeared, but he never displayed arrogance or fuss. On the contrary, he remained calm, always listening, his eyes soft and serene. But today, something in the air kept Milo from fully relaxing, almost as if he sensed that something was about to happen. Not far from the pond, a group of children were playing tag. The sound of feet crushing dry leaves, their laughter ringing out, and a ball rolling toward the edge of the water. A boy, slightly younger than Caleb, ran after it, not noticing the slippery algae near the pond's edge. In a split second, there was a loud splash as the small body hit the water, shattering the calm. At first, no one heard it. The music and chatter drowned out everything, but Milo jumped up instantly. His body went stiff, his eyes fixed on the surface of the water. That gaze seemed glued to the rippling waves. And then he heard the faint cry, trapped between fear and desperation. He froze. Water. The scream. The echo of memories crashed back, pulling him back to a time long ago, when he had been drowned in cold water beneath a cruel hand, where shouts and blows mixed with malicious laughter. Milo took a step back, his body trembling violently. His heart beat erratically in his chest, and in that moment all he could do was stand there, frozen by an old fear that had seemed to fade away. Caleb had gotten up at some point, his small hand gently resting on Milo's neck, not tight, not holding him back. His voice wasn't loud, wasn't urging, just a soft breeze that whispered through the mind of the panicked dog. "You know what to do! I'm here!" Milo tilted his head to look at the boy. In his eyes, there were no commands, no pressure, only trust, a trust that had once saved him from the abyss. And then, without a bark, without a glance behind, Milo broke free from the leash and ran like an arrow straight toward the pond. Each leap cut through the air, crossing the final remnants of dark memories. When his 4 paws hit the slippery grass, Milo didn't stop. He launched himself into the water as though he was born to swim, to rescue, to shatter the final boundary of fear. The surface splashed as waves crashed onto the shore, and Milo disappeared into the deeper waters. By now, people had realized what was happening, running toward the pond, but they all froze when they saw the dog wading through the water, heading straight into the current. A breathless moment. Then a woman's voice rang out. "It's pulling him! It's pulling him!" The boy's head emerged above the water, supported by Milo's neck and back. The dog didn't falter, despite the deep water and slippery algae, didn't hesitate, even though his whole body was soaked and weighed down. Each stroke of his legs, each breath, was a silent declaration that he was no longer the one who was hurt. He was the protector. When the 2 bodies, a boy and a dog, reached the shore, everything erupted. There were cries, loud cheers, and eyes filled with disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Caleb knelt down, his arms open wide. Milo didn't rush toward him. He just walked slowly, water still dripping from his fur. Then, as if it were the most natural thing, he rested his head on Caleb's shoulder, panting heavily, but with eyes that shone brightly. Derek stood behind, motionless. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the wet dog's back and speaking softly. "Good job, Milo. Very good." The center's doctor rushed over to check on the boy, confirming he was fine, just a little shaken. His family approached, bowing their heads in gratitude to Caleb and Milo. But all eyes were on the dog, the one once deemed beyond saving. Now, a hero. Trainer Jenna approached, her eyes misty. "We can teach skills," she whispered, "but we can't teach a heart to sacrifice." That Milo has always had. As nightfall descended, the picnic came to an end with the sound of a guitar and heartfelt stories. But the story of Milo, the dog who had once feared water, feared people and ran in hopelessness, was no longer just one of them. It had become a symbol, a reminder that courage sometimes doesn't come from strength, but from facing the very thing that makes us tremble the most, and still choosing to move toward it. For someone we love. The next day, When the video capturing the moment Milo leaped into the pond to rescue the boy was shared on the therapy center's official page, no one could have predicted how quickly the story would spread. Within hours, hundreds of comments flooded in, not only from those who had met Milo, but from people who had never heard his name before. They wrote about how they had cried, how they couldn't believe a dog who had been beaten, dunked in water, and cowered in corners could transform into such a silent hero. One boy wrote, "I used to be afraid of dogs because I was bitten when I was younger, but after watching the video of Milo, I think maybe I should give them a chance." From a dog who had been abandoned, Milo had now become a symbol of rebirth, a living testament that even the most wounded souls could heal, if loved the right way. The training center began receiving calls from all over. People inquired about the therapy programs. They said they had dogs like Milo, fearful, withdrawn, forgotten, and one by one, those small hearts began to have a chance at life again, reaching for the trust that Milo had paved the way for. Caleb watched all of this with eyes that sparkled. He didn't care for the praise or the newfound fame. He quietly rejoiced knowing that his and Milo's story had helped other four-legged friends find a chance at home. He sat beside Milo, now lying in the warm, golden sunlight, his fur still glistening with the remnants of the previous afternoon's wetness, and whispered, as though speaking to a close friend, "Do you see, Milo? We've changed something." Derek watched them from a distance, his hands fiddling with the worn leather strap. It was a piece of leather he had cut from his old, weathered belt. That day, he sat for hours in the garage, carving each line into a new collar. In the middle, with shaky yet firm strokes, he etched the words, "Milo, no longer afraid. No longer afraid of people. No longer afraid of being abandoned. And no longer afraid of his own past." When he placed the collar around Milo's neck, the dog didn't pull away like before. Instead, Milo leaned in, resting his head against Derek's stomach. A silent thank you, but one that made Derek's heart tighten, like the first time he had witnessed his son's hand touch the bars of that cage so many years ago. Not long after, Caleb's school held a small ceremony to honor students who had performed extraordinary actions. During that ceremony, when Caleb's name was called, amidst applause, he walked to the stage with Milo by his side. Under the stage lights, Milo's coat seemed to glow with warm streaks, just like the story he was carrying. When asked about what he was most proud of, Caleb answered without hesitation, "I didn't save Milo. Milo taught me what patience is. He taught me how to love someone not when they are perfect, but when they are most afraid. I dream of becoming a social worker one day, to help animals like Milo find a place called home." The room fell silent for a moment before the applause erupted, but Milo didn't care about any of that. He simply lifted his head, looking up at Caleb, and wagged his tail, a slow, steady wag, almost to say, "We're still us, aren't we?" And indeed, after everything, Caleb and Milo remained inseparable friends. It was still the mornings where the dog nudged his head against the boy's chest to wake him. It was still the afternoons running along the beach where the waves gently lapped at his paws, and Milo no longer feared them. But one thing had changed. The gazes that followed them were no longer filled with pity. Now, they were full of admiration. They were full of hope. Because now, everyone knew, if a dog like Milo could forgive, could love again, could save a life while still carrying old scars, then there was no reason for us to stop believing in the goodness of things. As the evening settled quietly, the backyard seemed to sink into a deep breath of the universe. The last streaks of sunlight spilled over the porch, stretching across the grass and gently brushing against the small shoulders of the boy sitting quietly in the middle of the yard. Caleb leaned back, his hands resting on the ground, his eyes gazing up at the sky, slowly shifting in color. Lying on his lap, Milo's eyes half closed, his tail swishing gently with the rhythm of the wind, as if each gust was whispering to him. There was no barking, no sounds to interrupt the stillness, only peace. A peace they had earned through many uncertain days, through moments that seemed insurmountable. Derek stood a few steps away, silently observing the two close friends as a father might watch his child learning a great lesson without anyone needing to teach it. He had once thought that raising a dog who feared humans was impossible, had wanted to give up more than once. But then he witnessed his 8-year-old son, waiting patiently beside a silent cage for hours, walking through cold, rushing water, sitting in the middle of a rainstorm, holding a shivering creature haunted by the ghosts of its past. And he watched as he, the man who had closed his heart from loss, was healed with every step of Milo's transformation. Derek bent down and placed a hand gently on Caleb's shoulder, so light that it seemed like he didn't want to disturb the moment. Caleb looked up and smiled. A smile not dazzling, but enough to make the sunset seem warmer. He gently stroked Milo's head, feeling each rhythmic breath, each soft movement beneath his hand, as if to remember. This was not just a dog, but a living testament to something greater, that no matter how many scars there are, trust can still be reborn when nurtured with kindness. In Caleb's heart, the words of his old trainer echoed. Milo didn't lose the ability to trust. He was just waiting for the right person. And now, he understood. Not only had Milo waited for him, but he too had needed Milo. A friend who listened in silence, a teacher who showed him patience, compassion, and the strength of unconditional love. In the distance, the laughter of children echoed from a small alley nearby, and the evening breeze carried the scent of freshly baked bread from a house where someone had just opened the oven. Everything seemed so ordinary, but for this small family, that ordinariness was a miracle. Caleb bent down and whispered into Milo's ear, "You know, maybe you weren't born to trust people, but I'm glad you chose to trust me." Milo didn't respond, but his tail gave a slight wag, and then he lifted his head and gently licked Caleb's hand, the sweetest response in the world. And as Derek turned to head back into the house, his eyes unconsciously passed over the inscription on Milo's collar. No longer afraid. Not every creature is born to trust people, but if there is one who is patient enough, they will come back and save us all. From the fearful gaze in the dark cage to the first trusting touch, Milo didn't just regain trust, he found a home, a person who was willing to wait without conditions. Perhaps sometimes a miracle is simply the patience to stay when others have already left. Milo's journey isn't just a story of a dog who was abandoned and learned to trust humans again. It's a testament that with love and patience, even the most wounded souls can be healed. Do you believe that love and patience can heal hearts that have been broken? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, share this story with those who need hope, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next heartwarming journey. See you soon.